Good evening. I want to welcome you to tonight's meeting of the Johnson City Regional Planning Commission, February 11th, 2020, that is. No longer rebroadcast, so pay attention. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. First up, I will ask our secretary, Mr. Dagenhart, to proceed, please. Sorry I didn't give you any warning, but can you do invocation and pledges for us, sir?
I'm not the secretary.
I thought you were the acting secretary. You're the assistant secretary, aren't you?
No, actually, it was incorrect in the minutes of last month.
Okay, well, that's what had me so confused, and then I read that, and I was like, am I missing something?
But you can't put me on the spot like that.
I will take care of it.
I can lead the pledge.
Okay.
But I'm Catholic, so
So, come on, give me a run
my
prayer
prayer
now.
is going to be a little different.
All right. God, thank you so much for an opportunity to come together tonight to do the business of this city. We ask for your grace for the work that we do here to be glorifying to you, and for the good of this city, that this city may just glorify you in its existence, its workings. May we function with fair minds and open minds and clear minds tonight that look for solutions to questions that are placed before us that are sharp, helpful, and good for the benefit of our citizens here. We thank you for your blessings on this city of ours, and that we're all here able to work together in a democratic society. And we want to lift this prayer up to you and ask for your blessings in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
God bless you.
All right, we made it past the roughest part of the meeting. Next will be approval of the agenda. I believe we may have an amendment to the agenda or an addition.
We do. We have an addition. It should be under new business, item number 3. And we need to add lot length to width 3-to-1 ratio variance request for division of the Galloway property minor subdivision.
Thank you. We have a motion for this addition to the amendment to the agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. We will add that item to the agenda under new business. Next will be approval of the minutes from the January 14th, 2019 meeting.
There are
I'm sorry, yeah. Okay, here we go. This is what happens when I read. No, January 14, 2020 meeting.
Sorry about that.
No, it's not.
there is a correction. I believe I am the secretary and Chris is the assistant secretary.
You
So-
are correct.
All right. And then there was just a typo on what is, for us, page 6 in our packet, the third paragraph, the second sentence, subdividing the property as proposed will compound the nonconformity in density by creating 2 lots instead of be creating 2 lots.
Okay.
Any other further additions or omissions, corrections? Seeing none, so do I have a motion to approve the minutes with those corrections?
So moved.
Motion?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And minutes are approved. Old business, first up, will be to reconsider the design deviations for the Verizon small cell tower.
Yes, thank you. What you received in your packet has been updated, so I would encourage you, if we can get this presentation to open, that the handout, the printout that is in front of you, that you refer to that as well as what was in the presentation, rather than what was in your packet. And so, yes, this was considered at last meeting. It was deferred. There was a lack of information and some discrepancies. And so what we've received is for the same location off of Liberty Bell Boulevard. That location is within our general residential design standard district. And so with that, we have some deviations with what's been proposed. The height requirement is 25 feet. The pole design is for a decorative base, and the diameter width is a maximum of 6 inches. And then we also have a standard for concealment where the equipment associated with the facility must be concealed or designed in a way as to not be a visual distraction. The request we have, as presented, is 36 and a half feet tall, which obviously exceeds our 25-foot height limit. The diameter is 10 3/4 inches, and that exceeds our 6-inch limit. And the equipment is now has been relocated from a shroud cabinet to being put in the base, but that would eliminate the decorative base. So that's what we've been presented. Compared to where we were last month, we had 35-foot 2-inch height, a 15-inch diameter. That may have not been made clear at the last meeting, but that was essentially what they were proposing. I think that there was an incorrect diameter presented last time. That was part of the lack of information that we were missing from the applicant. And then they had an external mounted equipment cabinet or shroud. And then compared to this month's submission, where we're at 36 and a half feet, so just about a foot taller, but a diameter that is down to 10 inches, so just a 4-inch difference from our requirement. And then that equipment cabinet has been moved down here. It's non-decorative. So if we look at the location, just point out a quick few things. This states a 30-foot, I know it's small, 30 feet separation from the edge of pavement to the location of the pole. And then these coordinates are what is listed on the plans as submitted. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes. The elevation at street level, this is, the pictures are looking east, and then this diagram would be looking west. But we're taking into account the drop-off of the slope of the side of the hill. And what they're showing here is that the street elevation would be, if you're 36 feet, so there's a discrepancy there, where the aerial shows a 30-foot distance from edge of pavement to pole location. This shows, it says 360 feet, but it's supposed to be 36 feet. And so there's a 6-foot discrepancy there. And so that affects the elevation of where the pole ground level versus the street elevation, what that difference would be. So what they're showing is 1754 at the ground level and 1760. So the first 6 feet of the pole would be below street level, and the other 30 feet would be above it. That's what they've proposed.
Might that be 360 inches?
I think it's just a typo for 36
Okay, so it's
feet.
36 feet, okay.
Yeah. Because that's actually come up in some other calculations.
Okay.
So that would make sense. So this is information from their plans, basically follows the same information I've already presented.
Matt, if street level and ground level are one and the same, it's still 36 feet though, correct?
The 36 feet is the distance from the edge of the pavement.
The height of the tower.
Oh, yeah, the height.
So if we're at street level and ground level, regardless, it's still going to be that height.
Yes. So, and it's,
So
we're still looking
There's never going to be
at.
a uniformity. Will there ever be any type of uniformity if you have an undulated terrain?
So the height limit is 25 feet. So it should
Our
be at
height
25
limit.
feet. And in this case, they're proposing 36 feet. What we're doing is taking into account that this is down
Okay, so you will have
down in
uniformity.
elevation. Well, that's up for
Discussion.
consideration.
But this is considering a single pole placement here.
This is a single pole placement.
And
there
I
are-
mean, I'm not sure how often these are actually within visual distance of one another.
That would ultimately, as far as these types of facilities and the potential for use with 5G versus 4G, this is going to work in our 4G network. This same type of infrastructure is what is being used for 5G, but 5G actually will have closer, so they would be within line of sight, so there's no breaking coverage.
Okay.
5G does not travel through materials well, so it needs direct line of sight to its users. So you're going to see them.
Like peer-to-peer.
So Commissioner Pavlich's concern is that we want to plan for some sort of uniformity of look when we start having more poles stuck closer together, correct?
For height is what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That's something for staff to keep in mind. We have a 25-foot limit. This would be 6 foot over visual if you're level with the pavement. I mean, 31 feet essentially.
Well, this is a deviation, and
29
that, I
feet.
think that what
Okay.
he's pointing out is a consideration for the commission.
Yeah.
And it is something we're trying to take into account because of the uniqueness of the location being down the side of a slope. And I'll come back to those measurements and as part of my recommendation. These are some images that were submitted by the applicant to get a visual of what the pole would look like from the street level, from different angles.
No, that's pretty ugly.
The other thing that's unique about this is that it's, this 30 foot or 36 feet off of the street makes it different than our typical light poles and things like that. So it's not right up next to a sidewalk or encroaching into the pedestrian or even vehicular environment. So this was done by staff engineer Alan Cantrell, who did some analysis. He took the coordinates that were provided in the plans that were submitted and put it into our GIS database and came up with that location is actually 32.2 feet from the edge of pavement, not 36 feet and not 30 feet. So it's kind of splitting the difference. And at 32.2 feet, the height at the ground, at the edge of pavement is 1760. That is in line with what the applicant submitted, as you can see here. The elevation at the ground would be 1750. So there's a 10-foot difference versus a 6-foot difference. And so that is that's the only kind of discrepancy that I want to draw attention to. Otherwise, the diameter of the pole with the distance that it is away from our other street lights, the 6-inch is really based on the diameter of our existing street lights, our decorative poles, such as this one pictured here. I think that the 10-inch would accommodate this facility and the benefits it provides from cell phone service without drastically being a major visual distraction because it's much closer to our 6-inch than the original submission. Additionally, moving the equipment down from being on the side of the pole down below street grade is a significant improvement for concealment and meeting that requirement. The only other deviation is on height. If it's a 10-foot difference, if they're at 35 feet or 36 feet in total height, and 10 feet of that is below street grade, then we're at a 25 or 26-foot difference at street level, and that is in the spirit of what our standards say. So with that in mind, staff recommends approval with that understanding, but I do think we need to specify the distance that this pole location will be from the street. So if we leave a range, or if we say it's 30 feet, we're going to end up with a different height than if it's at 36 feet. And so we've got some discrepancies from the applicant, and they're here to speak to this, and so maybe we can work those things out.
Do you have your recommendation that you want to impose on that?
Is
You
that
go at 32 feet?
That it be specific, that it be 33 feet? I am recommending that it be specified, so that that it's part of the so it's part of the motion. So that it won't be, so they don't go out there and say, oh, we meant 30 feet and now we're going to end up, or if we have to do it at 36, then we're going to do a taller pole, or we need to do a taller pole. I want them to be able to get the service they need to, at the height they need.
We could just, how about just say that the top of the pole should not be more than 1786 AGL?
You could do it that way.
That way it doesn't matter where the base of the pole is. That's how you're going to do it.
Or at street grade.
To get consistency?
Yeah.
But what street
Well, I
grade?
mean, on that, at that one site. 'Cause
Yeah.
then no matter where they stick it, that we're coming up with that 1786 in 6 inches is what it would be.
26 above what we know is
Yeah.
street grade.
Yeah.
That's definitely one way to do it.
Can you go back to that one where you showed the new pole up?
So,
Back one more?
These pictures?
Yes, please.
Yeah, there's 3 of them, whichever one.
And you guys think that looks okay?
If I could just design it myself and it magically would provide cell service, I would not design it that way.
I tell you what, compared to what these things look like over in Blowing Rock,
Yeah.
that looks like the Taj Mahal. Those things can just get disgusting with multiple antennas and just
Yeah, I've seen them
60
like
wires
that. Yeah, I
coming
know what
out.
you're talking
I mean,
about.
yeah.
But
I mean,
that doesn't seem to blend into anything to me. Maybe I'm just looking at it wrong. And Tim, I agree with what you're saying.
Okay.
I've seen them worse than
Okay,
this,
just-
but that doesn't necessarily mean we ought to
That's why
put
there's
up with this.
none of us to look at it. So,
What is the purpose for, I'll ask this question later, forget it.
Yeah, to technical questions, I'll defer to the
So yeah,
applicant.
So we're
Staff's-
saying, based on your research and calculations, from Liberty Bell, it's going to be 25 feet high from that street level.
25, 26
26
feet.
26
What's it
minutes.
from the street level of Oak Lane where we have city residents?
It
It's going to
would
be
be,
45 feet high.
yeah, I'm not sure the exact street grade elevation for Oak Lane. Let's see if we.
I think it was about, it split the difference, right, between Oak Lane and
We've got
Liberty Bell?
contours here. So if we're at 1650 here, 1640, so about 10 extra feet.
Is that in
There
the-
are very few residents, and that is a dead-end street, and it is wooded as well through there, but that's certainly needs to be given consideration.
Is it in the right of way?
It is in the right-of-way. It's a
And
wide
Mr. Manley,
right-of-way.
you might not be able to answer this, but is this gonna be something that's gonna be common, like, are we gonna do a lot of variances on these, the height of these poles and the base, and I don't wanna set our first one to set a precedent that, you know, all the recognitions we have are out the window.
I think that's a fair point.
I think if it's a
Based on
one-
my understanding, there's not been we've had 4 other locations submitted that haven't gotten to this stage. None of them had met our guidelines. So I would say that's a fair assumption that there's going to be multiple requests like this. But we have, and I'll let, Verizon folks speak to this, but through our process, we have pushed them closer to a design that is closer to conformity than where they started off and maybe where some other communities are experiencing. If that's it's up for y'all to decide if that's where we want to land, or if this is the first one, and so this is a precedent, yes.
And how many of these will there be eventually?
There's no real number known. So the state basically says that we can't just outright prohibit them. The industry got to our lawmakers and said, we need to try and, open the door for this so we can introduce this technology to cities. And so the state set those parameters and limited cities and how much we can regulate these. So you're going to see them in public right-of-way. There's 3 main providers. So this is Verizon, so you could have AT&T, Sprint, looking to locate in similar locations, or trying to access other locations. And then with 5G, with this next step in cellular speed, you're going to see this need for this line of sight that I mentioned earlier. So we've got a lot of pressure potentially in the future going on in our rights of way.
Matt, I'm going to ask the question I think I asked last month when this was brought up initially. The design standards that we created, are they practical? I mean, can these providers meet those standards and still are able to design, to create something that meets their needs? I mean, you're telling me that we have multiple submissions that are going to be coming along, none of them are meeting the standards. Do we need to readdress the standards, or do we need to be harder on the applicants and say, no, we made these standards for a reason and we need to hold them to the standards? Because I don't want to see every single submission that comes in have to come before this board and we have to discuss it again. So I feel like this is the time to answer that question. I mean, are we being practical with the standards that we created?
So the industry provided input on our ordinance. The most limiting, to my understanding, during that ordinance writing process was our diameter. The issue became, do we write our guidelines to open the door, so if they submit an application, we don't have any discretion, state law, as I mentioned, we have to approve it, or do we want to start out and slow walk this in and make sure we're putting eyeballs on these first few that are introduced to our city? And so we figured if we use a standard for a pole that exists in our city, and if they can meet that standard, then they will not be out of line with other poles that are found in our city, in our rights-of-way, then that would be ideal. And if we get to the point where the city leaders, planning commissioners feel that we need to go back and revisit our ordinance because we're being too limiting to this technology, it's worth the benefits of the technology, or the increased speed, or the filling the gaps in holes in cell service coverage. Those benefits are worth it for the trade-off of maybe the impact visually. That's what we're doing. We're trying to balance that. And so
Does our ordinance have any design standards for the enlarged portion of the pole? In other words,
Yes,
as Gary looks at, the pictures that you were showing before and says they're not aesthetically pleasing, does our ordinance have anything
not-
that addresses the diameter of that top portion that is
It
perhaps
does.
what
It
is
cannot exceed-
aesthetically not pleasing?
It cannot exceed 6 cubic feet, and that's a state standard. Yes.
Within our code, is there poles considered a light pole specifically, or just poles?
Lights, our ordinance states that a light would be provided if there is an inadequate amount of lighting and it's in a pedestrian area.
I guess my question
So
is,
they would add a light to
should
the
we add an ordinance that specifically addresses telecommunication posts or poles?
That's the ordinance we have. It's a
We
small
did-
cell wireless
It's done.
But it's
facilities
copied
ordinance.
to, but it's attached to another type of pole.
No, I think what you're saying is the way you chose the diameter of your poles, you were trying to make it consistent with the city. My
Right, it
question
wasn't
was going to be,
arbitrarily
did we
chosen.
actually look at what the communications companies are building, and did we insist on a 6-inch diameter whenever all the companies are actually building 10-inch diameter poles?
That was kind of my point.
There is not a standard across the industry. I mean, we had a 15-inch pole
I mean,
come down
for
to
an
a 10-inch pole.
internal equipment, if everybody goes, yeah, we want a 6-inch pole, but everybody goes, yeah, but then it's going to be externally, and our value judgment is based on, hey, we'd rather have all the equipment inside the pole, and everybody says, well, okay, you're going to need to have a 10-inch pole for that to function.
So
And if
there-
we can clarify that functionality of what's actually available in the industry, then maybe we could write that, walk into it, like you said, but as we've learned in this process, maybe we should say, oh, yeah, 10-inch poles are okay, because if it keeps everything inside the...
Sure. So this being brand new, there is still information to be gained. There's not a single industry standard. And so what our ordinance states is that it has a 6-inch pole, equipment has to be internal or has to be stealth designed. So there are other options for limiting the visual impact of the external equipment other than sticking a box on the side of it.
Right.
The issue with the diameter in this particular situation is that the amount of cable that they have inside the pole. So that could vary location to location and will vary from 4G to 5G. So we decided that it would be best to set a high bar, a standard for our city, a standard that's already elsewhere in our city, and have them meet that standard. And if they want to exceed that standard, then they have an avenue to do that.
Okay, I guess my concern is that it's, the nature of how we chose 6 inches was because it's elsewhere in our city, but yet we don't have a pole like this elsewhere in our city. And I'd like to have it based on what the industry data is, what do people have?
It kind of, yeah, that, I guess my point was partly there, but we picked the diameter based on air light poles, right?
We use that as justification for our diameter.
Okay, so.
So that we're trying to
technically,
blend
We're
with-
looking at 2 different types of technology. We're trying to take a light pole and make it fit a cell
No,
phone.
we're looking at poles that are in our right-of-way, and we're looking at visual impact of equipment that is located in our right-of-way, regardless of what it is, what it serves.
Right.
So we have erred towards protecting the community, the community's interest and the protecting from visual clutter.
Well, I think what
certainly.
we're trying to say is we understand protecting the visual impact for our community. Clearly, we want to do it. That's why we developed the ordinance. But whenever we choose our standards, we want them to be based on actual data other than just, hey, we like small poles.
I think that's an
I mean,
understatement of what
we
was-
want to actually look at it and go, okay, it looks like to have wires inside the poles, the justification for this is that, yes, you can put all the wires in a 6-inch pole, and we think that that's the way it should be done. I mean, if
There wasn't that clear of information provided.
right. And that's why you walk into it. But if we learn from our partners as we go through this, that looks like, okay, generally a 10-inch pole is what we need. I think
Absolutely.
we need to be willing to flex and move forward to that.
Yeah,
guess
no,
my
I think
point
we
is
need-
The industry is kind of telling us what the standard is.
Right.
Well, there's also, the industry is going to do
Well,
what
there's what they
is
have
easiest and
available.
cost
That's what I'm saying.
effective.
The state has told us that we have to have, something, we can't just say you can't have them.
Right.
And we can't just have an unrealistic standard.
I think going back to Commissioner Harrell's point, it's like, what does it look like? What does it blend in with? And I think, if we do make these as large as the industry wants, they're not going to look like light poles. They won't look like anything. They'll look like just like large.
They look like a big cotton swab.
Yeah. So I get like trying to find the balance between what they need and like what's going to look like a light pole.
That thing's scary looking. Driving down, the first time folks are dropping kids off at Liberty Bell in the morning and that thing, I mean,
Looks like a-
there's going to be some questions.
Absolutely.
To staff.
It's like a Terminator.
Commission, of what is this? So I think it is important that we get it.
It requires thought, but people get used to what they see every day. Those wires are ugly behind there. Underground wires are so much prettier. And if you look at pictures 100 years ago when there's 1,000 wires and stuff running down, our city streets, that was different for what we had then too. I think people, for a while, if the standard's uniform, are going to go, yeah, it's another pole, I don't even see it.
Yeah,
But-
but the newness of it is going to be the kind of the shocking things.
But I do think that's why we're here, is to very diligently look through and understand what the aesthetic should be and try to hold it together and see what the industry can do. So I appreciate where you come from, trying to develop an aesthetic that protects the city. Don't hear me wrong. I understand what you've done, and I think that's great. I think that's what we all are trying to grapple with, so.
One question. So the enlargement of this tower or cell, small cell, is that specific to the location or is that just, is it because of it's going to be like lower on the bank and the elevation, or is this kind of be what they're always asking?
It's much more appealing.
Ask the question again, I'm sorry.
The increased height, the increased diameter that they're requesting, is that just because of the location of where this one is?
I would defer to them on that question for this. We've seen so much variance between the different locations as far as height. I don't know if it was specific to, I don't know if they took our design guidelines height into consideration, if it was the lower elevation starting point that drove it up. I have not been able to find a consistent understanding of that with the different applications that we've seen come in.
Yeah.
So with the changes made to this one, though, after looking at the different applications that are coming in and the things that you've heard, staff's recommendation was to approval. because you felt like they had compromised to a reasonable point on this one? Is that, or what is this justification for approval with this one at this point
The
restated?
distance that it's set back from street activity with the variance in diameter. If it was 10 inches and was going to be on middle of the sidewalk and on Main Street, I don't think that, I think that would be too drastic of a difference. I think it really depends on circumstances. For instance, you look at the traffic light poles. They are very wide, and they still manage to blend in, like you mentioned earlier. You get used to some of these things. So I think it really depends on the application and the specific location and how it complements its surroundings. And in this particular situation, I think that it's
Put that box on their existing post.
Matt, I have
it's a
one,
reasonable request.
another question. I'm looking at the pictures in our packet on page 15 that are examples that you've provided us. And the one at the top shows what I assume is a light pole that has two lights projecting out to the sides and then has the tower portion on the top of that. And I find that much more aesthetically pleasing. Has any discussion occurred whereby you all combine the feature of the street light and these towers together and put them into a single pole rather than having this duplicate like we have in this instance? Because that
Sure, so
picture seems to suggest.
replacing an existing light pole with this.
Yes.
That was not what we were proposed. And so in this particular location, because there's no sidewalk, because it's far removed from the pedestrian area, and these lights are really designed, they're more at a pedestrian scale, that no light was really needed. And so that conversation did not happen. But I don't think that with the diameter and height that they were proposing, jumping down to a 20-foot, 6-inch pole with a small base in the middle of the median seemed like a likely ending point from where we started. But
That
in
is
other applications in different locations, that is definitely the idea, is that we do not want to increase the number of poles in the right-of-way. We want to either stay the same and provide the same lighting elements with the same design, aesthetic design. And so that would be more of a downtown type of application for that.
Thank you. I thought maybe it'd be a good time to ask for the applicant to step up, and we can ask questions as necessary. Is that okay with you guys? Thank you, Mr. Manley. Thanks for coming again. If you don't mind
Yes,
giving us
sir.
your name
Yeah.
for the record.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and fellow commissioners, forgot how to say it. Andy Loeb, Loeb, Tower
Andy.
Source.
All right.
I could go through a few of the quick questions that y'all were talking with Matt. Basically, because the ordinance, usually we do try to match, and I believe I mentioned this last month, we do try to match what current utility poles, how you said it doesn't blend in with the current wood utility poles, but because the ordinance, it's required to be, I believe, a metal decorative pole, so that's why we have the metal decorative pole.
What about the diameter, 6 inches versus 10 inches?
Well, it's because of the equipment.
Is-
12 coax cables have to go up there.
Is that for, and one of the questions was, do we expect when you put poles in a city that most poles have 12 coax cables that require 10 inches or more? Or is that, hey, is this one an outlier? And sometimes we only have.
Most of these with this type of technology will require that same amount of coax cables. I can't speak for the rest of the industry, I can only speak for Verizon.
But generally this
But
is,
generally, this is what you will need for Verizon.
so you're going to get a 15-inch pole with stuff potentially all interior? Can you do that or no?
Not with this design, because there are other pieces of equipment like the radios, which some of the radios have an 11-inch width. So that's why we had the shroud in the previous months.
Right.
There, and that's what's in the base, so that it has enough, to hold the other pieces of equipment besides the coax cables.
Okay. So, but generally, we're going to be looking at a 10-inch size pole.
Yes, I believe it's 10.75, just to, be
So if you
specific.
saw the picture that Commissioner Wild had, that had the two decorative lights on the top that would go downtown, would that pole be 10 inches around as well?
It should be, I don't think we've pinned down that design yet, but there are designs that Verizon has approved that has similar type of acorn lights or similar type of street lights to what Johnson City already has downtown.
The lights would be, but the diameter would be a 10-inch
The
versus
diameter
6?
would be most likely around 10 inches.
Okay. Just going through some things I've been thinking about. Thank you. Questions?
Mr. Loeb, so the height for this one of 36.5 inches, is that going to be standard elsewhere when you guys reproduce these on a larger scale, or is that specific for this situation?
It's basically specific for this situation with the trees on one side and the higher elevation on the other. Height is always a big discussion when it comes to small, or any type of wireless pole or tower or anything. So usually it varies on where it is, and we try to match the existing height of other utility poles. The wooden poles over there are about 40 feet, but I believe they're further down on the grade. Obviously, if the height's everywhere 25 feet, you can't put a 35-foot pole. It just, we try to match what's there. So here we're trying to match it, but if you can go higher, we'd prefer to go higher, but sometimes it won't work with the current ordinance or with what we can get a permit for.
Are you able to amend the design of the pole after installation, like adding additional utilities to the interior or exterior of these poles?
Do you mean like,
Would that be a request that we would see?
what do you mean by additional utilities?
Well,
Like,
additional service, like on a cell phone tower where you see
where there's like
different-
3 different
arrays.
providers? That would be up to Verizon and their future plans, which I don't think anybody would know about that.
Hi, everybody. Alex Broski with Verizon. Thanks for having us.
What was the last name, sir?
Broski, Brosky.
Thank you.
Thanks, yeah. So with and I want to thank you all again for having us in again, and I also want to just throw it out to Matt. We've been actually going through iterations now for months. We've met on several occasions, and him and his staff have been great to work with, and you guys are obviously very concerned and on top of what's happening in your community, and we certainly appreciate that. With regards to iterations in the future, with the small cell technology right now, it's not a co-locatable piece of infrastructure, primarily because of the elevation. There's just not enough room on the pole. In the macro world, as we put it, when you're 75 to 250 feet in the air, then there's actually there's billets placed for multiple carriers. So now it is possible that at some point, if we want to add, say, 5G to this pole, we could add antennas to the pole. And that would just mean a reconfiguration of the top of the pole. Probably wouldn't increase the elevation at all. It would just be different technology. With this particular node, and I think with all the nodes that we're introducing to Johnson City, these are called capacity nodes. And what that basically means is right now, there's coverage in that area, but by virtue of the school and the population and the traffic trends, our macro site sector that is serving that particular area has become overwhelmed with data usage. And so what these capacity nodes do is we run an additional fiber to that and offload the macro site to give higher bandwidth and greater speeds in that particular area. So that's really the nature of what's driving this pole. And whoever had the question regarding altitude, it's driven by our RF group. They have a propagation map, and that's well beyond my pay grade, but they determine what existing infrastructure is around what we're trying to cover. And so based on that, the elevations are sort of placed into that propagation. Generally, the sites that we're putting in have a rad center, or what we call a rad center, which is where the antenna is, anywhere from 30 to 50 feet. So Most commonly, I see somewhere between 33 and 40 feet on the RAD center. So you're
For height.
generally going to fall within that general range. If we're higher, it's generally going to be in a commercial area. If we're lower, it would be in a residential area.
So you don't generally put up 25-foot height poles?
No, actually, we do. We're deploying in other communities throughout the state of Tennessee, particularly in the downtown metro areas, where we don't, if we're covering, say, a streetscape, we've got 25-foot poles, 30-foot poles. Yes.
More of them.
Correct.
Great. So
What
we
about
can
the
do that.
diameters, the 6-inch versus 10?
Yeah, so the
Talk more about
diameter,
6-inch poles,
so this
sir.
iteration is actually a brand-new iteration. This was, we had some other communities out in the North Carolina markets that were experiencing the same trepidation, and so we kind of put our pens to the paper to try to find a lot of it is centered around, the shroud is actually a misnomer. The shroud is really just covering a bunch of messy-looking radios. So we could take the shroud off, but then you're just going to have the equipment. But it's a cabinet base. So by eliminating that from the side of the pole, it made the design look much more sleek and stealth, if you will. And then we were able to place what you're seeing on the side of the pole essentially in the base of the pole. So that's kind of the iteration that we came up with to try to satisfy this particular installation. And yes, the increase in height that we're asking for is primarily based on the fact that we're on a slope. Generally speaking, in a vanilla world, on a flat surface, these would be all about the same height. But again, surrounding trees, surrounding buildings, what we're trying to cover, slopes, et cetera, play into what we're asking for. And so that's why in this particular case, we needed a little bit more elevation in order to achieve our coverage objectives.
And just off the cuff, this is one pole to handle what you need with this diameter. No benefit or possibility of just having two poles placed somewhat differently in the right-of-way? Would that make any difference?
Again, it depends on what RF is attempting to cover with that. So I think at this point, I don't know of any other sites that are slated to go in this particular area. I think this is the one that we're looking to, cover what we're missing in terms of capacity and speed. And that's what we're trying to deliver for our customers and your constituents, from that standpoint, so.
Thank you for answering our questions. Do we have further questions, Jamie?
So in the reality, this really is not your 5G design standard. Would you agree with that?
It is not. This is a 4G pole.
This is for, one-time specific use for a specific problem that you're trying to fix.
That is correct. And actually, the 5G iterations are much more sleek. A lot of times, we can just have a straight fiber hookup. We don't need as much cabinetry on the 5G.
Okay.
So when we're deploying 4G, which is actually going to help now, so we could put a bunch of 5G poles in right now, but nobody's got a phone to make it work. So that infrastructure is being rolled out, and then the handsets will follow once we actually have that. But to answer your question, the 5G iterations are a little bit different, and in most cases actually have a more simplistic design.
Can they go down to 6 inches in diameter, that sort of a thing? To look
I
more
haven't
like our light
seen
poles?
6, honestly. I mean, this 10-inch was a big stretch for us.
Okay.
But the only way we could get to 10 was to take the base and make it bigger. But that did eliminate the shroud, so it was kind of a trade-off.
Thanks for answering our questions. Yes?
So essentially, there's basically some sort of algorithm that kind of keeps calls that are local to that area, there in that area, instead of bouncing them off the towers? Is that what it's typically for?
Yeah, so if you imagine looking overhead at a cell tower, and you'll notice there's sets of antennas that are pointing, so it's kind of broken down into a pie.
Okay.
And so those are called sectors. And so in this particular case, probably by virtue of the school, one of our sectors, RF has identified as getting overwhelmed with data
Okay,
usage.
I get you.
And so this particular site was placed specifically in that sector to offload that macro so that the greater community that's being served by that sector continues to experience that speed and bandwidth, but also services that immediate need that I think is probably being generated by the school.
All right, thanks, sir.
Any further questions?
Happy to answer anything about anything.
Mr. Brodsky, you've been very helpful. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be here.
Okay. Do we have any discussion or motions on this tab?
Open to public. hearing
know
on
that
this?
this requires a public hearing. Preston? Anybody here wishing to speak for or against? We can certainly listen to the public on it if they have a question. Anybody here wishing to speak for or against this variance for the poll? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. All right, that's a good question. Any further questions for staff or discussion or motions on the commission?
I mean, I'm not thrilled with the design. I don't find it aesthetically pleasing. And given that this is our first in this new era, I'd like to see us try to stick as close to the design standards we've set as possible. Given that, I feel like the applicant has come back and tried to really do due diligence and work with us to create something that meets their needs and addresses the majority of our concerns. And knowing that this is not setting a standard that we're going to see a bunch of these poles pop up all over the city looking like this, I'm more comfortable with this single one than I was before.
Is that a preface to a motion?
Only if other people don't want to speak.
Before a motion, Matt, has there been any thought given to public notice in regards to, hey, this is going to be, like a rezoning notice of, hey, this is a proposed site for, communications tower.
That is actually,
Speak to that.
sure, yeah, please, you'd like to comment on that?
So we have set up a
you.
website, a couple websites, and I think we originally had it slated as a Knoxville site, but we've changed it to East Tennessee. And it's an informational site, and I'll be happy to share the link with Matt, who can distribute it out to you guys. This would also help, because if somebody sees something, they're not going to call me, they're going to call the city, right? So this gives you a very good tool to be able to explain or to send them somewhere to gain more information about RF safety, design, what's driving, what is 5G, what does it do, why, all those kinds of questions. But in conjunction with that, when our folks are out putting in the fiber and then actually constructing the site, they're equipped with door hangers type materials that they can also refer constituents, to more information. And then also they can, on that website, they can make a specific inquiry with us that we will get back with them on and follow up with them via email, phone call, whatever they select from that standpoint. So
Appreciate you being friendly with the community with information. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
I've
Matt,
got
we
a
don't
question
have-
for Mr. Brodsky. Tim.
Yes,
I don't mean to
please.
interrupt.
Yes,
Go
sir.
ahead.
What, are you telling us that this is the best technology can do right now? Or is it possible if we said, look, we don't really like this as much as we would like to see it, could you go back to the drawing board and come back with another presentation? Or is that feasible?
That's a great question. And again, we've had multiple iterations as we've gone through the process. And in order to meet the objectives of pole diameter, pole elevation, and then just doing something on the decorative side as opposed to popping in a new wood pole, I think right now for what we're able to produce, this is probably the best we can do. I will say this, though, as you start to see other carriers, they all have different vendors, so there's going to be different flavors. There's not it's not like all telephone poles are wooden and brown and they have cables going across. So we're kind of working through this as an industry as well, trying to believe me, I wish we had like 4 poles we could say, here they are, you
Yeah.
choose your flavor, and that's great, but we're trying to comport as best we possibly can with the neighborhood streetscapes, so that, it lessens the impact on the visual and again, meets our objective needs, for coverage.
Well, I appreciate that, but a little competition's a good thing.
Yeah, well, if somebody else comes up with a nicer looking pole, please let me know, and we'll find out who they're getting it from, but, yeah, I know you will. I will. But honestly, for what we were asked to try to accomplish with the diameter, specifically with the 4G installation, this is the best that I've seen, and I think that, this is probably as close as we can get to that. And I mean, we can paint the pole brown or another color. If black is not the color that seems to comport with that streetscape, we could go with a dark brown or something to make it blend in, with the tree line a little bit better or whatever. So we've got some flexibility from that standpoint, but I think somebody's done a lot of studies, and black on the side of the road seems to be the color that people see past the easiest. So.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Just to follow up on those comments, that's, I think he stated well why the recommendation is for approval, because that was staff sense as well, that they've presented the design that's closest to what they'll be able to that will provide a benefit to them and is closest to our standards.
And to answer Mr. Hickson's question,
Yes,
from a city
so-
standpoint, we haven't required hearings, notifications, and things like rezonings that we do. or-
Beyond this, Planning Commission notice that goes out, there's no additional requirement that's in our ordinance. I actually think that's a really good idea. You could just take a radius. We have the tools to do that, to be able to pull all the addresses within a certain distance. But we would want to definitely set that distance and have some basis for that decision, so that there's a standard and we use it in all locations whenever this comes up. So, now, and that would be, that could either be for those that come to Planning Commission, or it could be for any application that comes in. There are cities that do that. They require notice, and if they receive complaints within a 30-day period, then it kicks it to a public hearing.
Yeah, to commission.
Yeah.
If I'm living on Oak Lane, I think I would have appreciated being notified and my input saw it as a city resident. Ultimately, I think we probably, I think the presentation by you guys was very helpful, and I think that would be helpful to a resident, but I think that would save you guys a lot of heartburn and maybe the commission a lot of heartburn that they were notified beforehand. And so I guess the question is, should we do that now?
I think that's one of those questions we should look at very carefully probably in committee, because there's a lot of implications to that. Because when you start drawing those radiuses in certain areas, it seems like a pretty doable thing by staff, and then other times it can get pretty labor intensive, and next thing you know, you're notifying 200 people. So I'm sure you'd like to look at that over
And
time.
I don't know what those implications are from a staff
Yeah, I think it's
perspective.
something we should look at in committee. I don't know that we could dissolve that tonight. Preston?
No, I think you're right on the money, and Matt made a good comment that before we go out and arbitrarily mail letters to X folks within X distance, which is from a legal perspective is a dangerous move, because it's purely, it is 100% arbitrary.
And this is public.
And so, because the question would be, well, Bob was within 100 feet, and then Sue was within 110 feet, and Sue didn't get a letter. And so Sue wants to know why she didn't get a letter. So Matt's comment is a great one. It needs to be a standard that's in the ordinance. Now, we can go back through the legislative committee and well, actually, technically, this is a city code ordinance, so, but, we can certainly work with the planning commission, but that could be something we would need to build into the ordinance. The other thing just to consider in this, and these are all great valid questions, is whether or not this unit goes in is not the question. The question is, on the table are the aesthetic issues.
Right.
The state has already drafted legislation in most of the states in the country. This industry is a very powerful industry, and they have been very successful in lobbying not only the federal government, but each state government. And so they are very well protected. And so, and part of it is that you look at the usage of these things. I thought it was pretty interesting to hear from Mr. Brodsky that the reason why we need this is because probably every single student in Science Hill has a cell phone. And so it's becoming such a norm that we're really getting to a point of, it's really not an option anymore. This is now part of life. And so as opposed to, do we do it? Well, we do it. How do we make it blend in? And so, but yeah, I think it's a great question. We just need to make it a standard in the ordinance.
Thank you.
Mr. Manley, when you talked about setting the specific location and the height for this, what were the options that we came up with?
That it be specific is what I was recommending. And so whatever you're comfortable with from a height, we make sure that that's specific, and that it relates to, I like Chairman Zients's comment that if we establish a height that you're comfortable with above the street elevation, then that will dictate where the distance from the street, within 5 or 6 feet.
Yep, you basically say 1587, I believe, would give them 6 inches to play with in height, if I recall your
That would give it,
AGL.
yeah, that would give them 27 feet above.
Yep.
Street elevation. And so then if that's 30 feet from the street edge or 36 feet from the street edge,
32.
they can go where they need to go to hit that height. I think that would serve their needs. It would remove some of those question marks. I think it's a really good proposal.
MSL, I guess, we didn't see that.
Is that right to you, as far as what you need?
Any further questions or motions?
We wouldn't want to end up where we approve a specific location that then dictates with this height pole that they're going to be maybe lower than what they intended and aren't hitting, providing the level of service that they need to. So I think that the way that you've proposed addressing it would solve all those issues.
Can you clarify then for me, because I am considering that we are considering design deviations for a single wireless small tower at a specific location, not for multiple. Is that correct?
That's correct. One specific location.
So we are only considering this for this one particular tower at this one specific location at this
340
time?
Liberty Bell Boulevard.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we approve the submission with the caveat that it has, what is it, 1587?
I believe it's 16.
Is it 16? Good, make sure we have that right.
Let's get that number down there.
Dig a hole. Put it in
Let's get to the contours. Excuse me, this is 17, so it'd be.
1787.
1787 would be, that would be the height above the street edge. The elevation at the street edge.
So that the pole will be placed at an elevation of 1787.
We no higher than 1787.
Another way to do it, to be extra cautious, would be it could be no higher than 27 feet above the elevation at the street edge.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
It'll
You
be
want to
just
say it
there.
like that?
I do.
Okay, great. With the 10-inch diameter,
10 and 3/4 inch.
10 and 3/4 inch diameter, and any other, and with the shroud at the base as proposed.
That's correct.
And Matt, could we charge you guys, or I guess, let's just keep it on the agenda. I really like what Clay said about Commissioner Hickson about having, just considering, like, let's have a conversation about, do we want to start warning people or giving people a heads up, what that would look like.
Absolutely. I think that's a great suggestion.
Not tonight, but let's just.
I agree, that's a great suggestion, and I think, and so that would require an ordinance change, but staff, in writing the initial ordinance, staff knew that we'd be monitoring this emerging technology, and that we were being cautious in introducing it, and that it very well may need revision going forward. So I think some of the other discussion we've heard tonight, kind of suggesting that, we may need to go back and move this thing, so we're not coming here hammering this out. But we want to make sure that we get the first few correct.
It's an opportunity for us to learn. Thank you for doing it that way.
Absolutely.
Did your motion include the specific address, so that we know that this is for one and only
It
one?
was the motion, so.
Let me attempt to restate your
Yeah,
motion.
thank you.
Okay.
We have a motion for approval of the variances for a 4G pole to be placed at 340 Liberty Bell Boulevard with a height no greater than 27 foot against, or greater than the edge of the road elevation, and it shall not be more than 10 and 3/4 inches in diameter, and shall have a base on it, a shrouded base for equipment inside. Does that sound correct? Okay.
That's correct.
We have a second. Have a second from Commissioner Pavlich. Any further discussion?
Yes, before we vote, have we given consideration to the fact that this is one company and that there's going to be a competitor and potentially another competitor, and how we space these poles and how, does that mean anything tonight with this motion? Are we forced to approve, or, I don't know, it just seems like, to me,
It seems like with short towers or short poles, you're going to end up with 3 different poles for 3 different providers, is what you're getting at.
The introduction of a new pole within a right-of-way must be approved by the city manager or his designee. So there is consideration in the ordinance that there is something distinctly different about putting a new pole in the right-of-way versus either attaching to an existing pole or taking an existing pole out and replacing it and putting your equipment on that replacement pole. And so those are the 3 ways to deploy this type of technology. This particular case is a new pole.
So,
at
I
this
mean, in
location.
this RF area, this designated area, if 2 more companies come up, tell us and say they want 2 more poles, are we going to have to stick 2 more poles right beside that one?
We would have.
Is it the state law? How does that
We would
work?
be having a conference to distinguish that. So we have the ability to basically sit down and negotiate with those providers to balance the interest of the city with their interest when it comes to location of new poles, especially when there's multiple providers kind of vying for the same position. So that language is in there, and that's about as much as direction as the state law gives us, is that we are allowed to extend our timeline for approval and go into conference with the provider to come up with some agreement.
Understand. Any further discussion regarding the motions on the floor?
I'd just like to ask Mr. Broski one more question.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir.
In other areas that you have seen this happen where multiple providers, do you ever come together as multiple providers and share one pole?
No. Again, with the small cell technology, it's,
bad.
it is just, and you can imagine,
It gets crowded.
well, it can, but I will say this, it's not necessarily going to happen where if we stick a pole here that, our competitors may need that particular space.
Based on usage, right?
Yeah, it depends on usage, and then it depends on, we may be co-located on a macro site very near that spot with other carriers, or we may not. We may have a single, use pole, and in some cases, we may be fully covered and not need a location, whereas another provider might. So there is going to be some variance. This will not follow like ants heading towards the breadcrumb. It will vary from place to place, but suffice it to say, areas that are around, say, hospitals, schools, very heavily densified, multi-tenant living areas, you will probably see trends in those areas, but other areas in downtown city streetscapes, there could be some variance. And then particularly once you get out of the metropolitan areas, residential areas, that will vary probably even more vastly than what I just described.
All right. Thanks, sir.
Thanks. Again, with healthy discussion as we're considering a motion and a second. Want to make sure we do have the information to make a decision. Do we have any further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Commissioner Dagenhart.
yes.
Commissioner Harrell.
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich.
Yes.
Commissioner Whitfield.
Yes.
Commissioner Wild.
Yes.
Commissioner Calhoun.
Yes.
Chairman Zayons.
Yes.
Motion approved as stated.
Thank you.
Ask a question. Matt, the reason that we're talking about this here is because of the variance, is that correct?
That's correct.
Otherwise, it would be handled by city staff.
By staff, that's correct.
Okay, and does this go to the city commission? Does not, it stops here?
Yes.
And in the future, as we get the ordinance fine-tuned, these types of things will go through a little easier, I would imagine. So I must step away. I'm going to ask Commissioner Wild to take over the chair position for the rest of the meeting.
No, I don't need to move to the middle. and I'm sure I will not be nearly as eloquent as Tim.
I'm sorry.
I'll take care of that.
I can come back when I'm done if y'all are still here.
My next commitment is at 9. I hope I make it.
See you, buddy.
Okay. Well, now that we've finished the old business, we'll move on to new business. And the first item on our agenda is to consider the annexation of properties located at 5112 Bobby Hicks Highway and 3309 Sid Martin, zoning B5, Planned Community Business District.
Actually, the Planning Commissioners, before you is a request to consider annexing 2 pieces of properties on Bobby Hicks, one on Bobby Hicks Highway 5112 and the other on Sid Martin Road. These are adjoining pieces of properties. They're owned by the same individual. And Ballard Head has acquired this property and is requesting that this be annexed into the city. This lot, that is the one that has the building on it, and then the parking lot at this end is the adjoining lot on Sid Martin Road. So you see the properties adjoin the city limits, everything here in color in yellow, that is inside the city. So it meets the first legal requirement that it needs to adjoin the city limits. Is also requested by the property owner, and it is within the planning region, the urban growth area of the city.
Would somebody please shut that door? Thank you.
Critical city services such as water and sewer are already available to these properties. The line here in blue, that is water, is already available on site. It's a building there. And although it's in the county, it's currently on city services. And then this line in brown, that is sewer. Based on that's why you don't have any capital investment for water and sewer. Everything is a zero. Staff estimates based on the existing value of the property. These calculations are based on the existing value of the property, considering if there is no improvement, property taxes would be $10,547 if this is not doesn't become a not-for-profit property, because Ballard has some of the properties that are on not-for-profit basis, and those ones do not pay taxes. The property owner has requested that this be zoned B5, which is generally the prevailing or the predominant zoning district for commercial developments in the gray area. The property adjoins a B5 zoning district. This is the current zoning map. The area here in red, this is all B5. This area in purple, that's I1, that's light industrial. So this is intended to be used as a training center for employees, not as an industry. And that will be a use that is permitted in the B5 zoning district, and it will be in accordance with the future land use map. The future land use map designates this piece of property for commercial development. All of this area in red is commercial, the area in yellow, that is residential, and the area here in purple, that is industrial. Staff recommends that this be annexed into the city because it meets all the requirements for annexation, that it be zoned B5, which is simply concerned is in extending the adjoining B5 zoning district into this piece of property, and that the plan of services as you have in your file be approved as submitted.
There are questions of staff at this time?
I just have one question.
Yes, sir.
So the annexation policy, criteria 1.5.2.2 says it needs to be financially beneficial and cost-effective for the city. If Ballard does decide to use this as a nonprofit status and pay no taxes on it, would it still meet that criteria? Would it still be beneficial to the city for us to annex it?
From a tax perspective, is it possible, looking at it on the surface, it may not be.
Because if I was Ballard, I'll use my 501c3 status and not pay taxes.
I think that's a question I will leave for Ballard Head on how they intend to operate this. I will leave that question for Ballard Head to deal with, to respond to.
But we could put that in the approval. We could contingent on it.
No.
We could not.
We cannot contingent upon it not being non-for-profit.
Correct.
No. If Ballard is non-for-profit, if that's their status under federal regulations, that's what they are. We cannot stop them from using the property as not-for-profit. Legally, we cannot.
And what is the benefit to the city for this annexation?
They intend to use the property for training of staff. Sometimes economic benefits is, employment that you create for the city. That can be an economic benefit to the city. Now, of course, there can be the question, if this property is left in the county, can city residents not still go there? I mean, that's a fair question to pose. I think some of these questions I would prefer to leave them for Ballard Head, because they really go down to why you're requesting to be annexed into the city. So I will leave that question for Ballard Head to answer.
I have one question.
Jamie?
Is there still a fire station that can service that particular location that's in the city,
Yes.
So we
I
don't have
think-
to build a fire station to service that particular
No,
location?
no. When we receive any request for annexation, we send out letters to all city departments, police, fire, transit. Everybody gets a letter and notice. And one of the things we ask is if this particular annexation request is going to require any capital improvements, then we give them a deadline, indicate, and we will include that in our calculations, cost-benefit analysis calculations. I didn't get any statement from the fire department indicating that they're going to need
Thanks, sir.
such services. You're welcome.
I'm just curious, what kind of training are they going to do out there in that building?
That is one of the questions I'll prefer to leave to Ballard Head to respond. So they will know better what they will be doing on site.
Mr. Dagenhart?
There's a small pocket that appears to be, it's on one of your earlier maps that shows the city property, city-owned property. Do you see the small pocket?
Yes.
Can you explain what that is?
You mean this small?
Yes, that very small little pocket.
That is Walgreens. It's a piece of property. It's currently in the county and is going to remain in the county.
Belongs to Walgreens, is that correct?
I'm sorry.
You said it belongs to Walgreens?
Yes, I think that side, there's Walgreens on that side. See, right, this is the property we're looking at, and that is the Walgreens sign right there. So that lot belongs to is Walgreens, and it's remaining in the county. They are not requesting to be annexed into the city.
That's not what the Walgreens lot is. The Walgreens lot is a lot larger than that little tiny sector, right? Is that correct?
No. Let me be sure. You mean this property and not this one?
Right.
Yeah. This piece of property is remaining in the county. The property owner is not requesting to be annexed into the city. So we're not including that in the annexation.
And that is not Walgreens, is that correct?
Give me a second. No, that's not Walgreens. This is Walgreens. That used to be like a small a service station. That is a service station that used to be there. Is this bigger one that is Walgreens?
It's owned otherwise.
It's owned otherwise, yes. It's not owned by Ballard Health.
Are there additional questions of staff at this time?
And we cannot include that in the annexation because it has to be requested by the property owner.
Okay. All right, at this time then, I'd like to invite the applicant or anybody else who would like to speak for or against this to the podium. And if you'd just please start by giving us your name and address.
I'm Scott Davis, 108 Woodlawn Drive, and I'm with Realty Trust Group, and we represent Ballard Health, property owner.
Thank you.
So-
And can you address any of the questions that the commission has
Sure.
asked for us?
So as far as what what the plans are. It's a very large building. The immediate needs right now, the plans, which will start this month, they're going to be training for Epic, which is their electronic medical records software. They're rolling this out to all their physician practices, and there's a big need for training long-term for these. Right now, there's a big go-live event that they're getting ready for, but long-term, a portion of this building will definitely remain training long-term. Another area in the back that is currently basically a warehouse space. There are 2 or 3 things in the programming that could happen there. It could be a lab. It could be more, you could put more offices of corporate people there. But that determination has not been made yet. So I can't speak to long-term what the rest of that building, but the main objective of that building right now is for training. And that will bring in people from all over the Ballard market to train there.
Okay, and can you answer for us why they're requesting annexation? What is the benefit to Ballard? What is the benefit to the city?
I think the obviously the main reason, well, everything else around it pretty much is city, and with that many people in a training facility, it would certainly benefit the applicant to have the fire and police closer by.
Okay. Were there other?
Thank you. And that answers why it would be beneficial for Ballard. Can you tell us why it would be beneficial for the city to annex?
I can't answer that for the city. And I also cannot answer whether or not it would be a not-for-profit use that would go in here and Ballard use that as a not-for-profit status for tax purposes.
Do you know if it's currently held in a not-for-profit entity or a taxable entity?
I don't recall what entity that it was purchased under.
Okay.
It's in the county though, right?
It is currently in the county.
It's nothing to us either way.
When it's annexed, it would mean something to
Do
us.
you anticipate having to add more parking?
There's the potential to have to add more parking, yes, sir. On the site, there's room to add some parking.
There to spend money. Get someone going down the street.
Are there other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate your being here. Is there anybody else who would like to speak either for or against this proposal? Seeing nobody rushing forward, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and I'll open it to discussion amongst the commissioners.
Especially in my profession, I appreciate the value of Ballard and what they mean to this community. But at the same time, our criteria, it has to benefit us somehow. It seems like this currently would not benefit us if the city was for tax benefits. So we'd be giving out services, we're not getting in return. And I guess that's that's the issue I'm having trouble getting past. I don't know if you guys are having trouble with that or can help you get past that.
Son, can you explain to us why the staff recommendation is for approval based on that concern? Because isn't that the staff recommendation, is that we approve the annexation request?
Yes, ma'am.
What is the rationale beyond that, for that recommendation?
First, we do not know for sure that this is going to be non-for-profit. So there is an element that if it doesn't end up being non-for-profit, then from a cost-benefit perspective, you've got that benefit element. It's not very certain. I have not been able to get that very clear from Ballard that this is going to be non-for-profit. They have some property that they have put on non-for-profit, others that they have not. So it's kind of up there in the air. Secondly, we took into consideration the fact that this is kind of filling in. So you're heading this way, you're going towards the airport. And you've got city property that is already in the city in that direction, which means police already driving that direction, fire driving that direction, and you've got these properties in between that is not in the city. It's like this area, this will basically be stripped kind of just following the road to our next property out there. This was done in the past, and then what you have going on now is kind of filling the area in between that city services are already driving out to that particular area. So we really didn't think that if this were just somewhere totally off at the edge of the city, that would have been totally different. In this particular case, we're kind of filling that area in between that city services are already driving in the corridor. That's one of the considerations we made.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
Sure.
And this is not contrary to anything that Hassan is saying, because I think his comments are right on point. Something else to keep in mind is that it helps that ballot whether or not they have these two pieces of property structured under their tax exempt or for tax entities. The fact that they are commercial properties means that redevelopment of these properties in the future is likely, and it is highly, or maybe I should say that in reverse. It is unlikely that Ballot Health is the final owner of that property. It's a little bit different than if you had a very large tract. Let's say you had a 25-acre tract that was a church. That's an institutional use, which is also not-for-profit. And that institutional use is oftentimes more permanent. There's no other way to say that. There is a real permanence with that kind of institutional land use. I think that would be a very different conversation than this commercial land use. Yes, the commercial land use is institutional, but it is an arm of our healthcare corporation, and the likelihood that is the final landowner and land use on that piece of property is fairly low.
Thank you.
If Preston, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, Ballot Health already owns the property.
They do.
They're already going to be training people there. There's already a plan to train the new employees that want to at the site. Is that correct?
Correct. Well, you would need to, definitively, Ballot Health would need to answer that, but that is our understanding. Right.
Other discussion among commissioners?
This seems like to me to be an orderly thing to happen. I mean, there's nothing that says any land that's already annexed can't turn into land that doesn't produce the same amount of taxes if it's sold or sold to a not-for-profit or anything like that. I think if we limit ourselves to the exact amount of the taxes it brings in without looking at the big picture of this corporate partner for the city and having utilization to where a lot of our city residents are going to be some of those people that are trained out there at that site, I'd be comfortable knowing that it's supported by the city, fire and police. It just doesn't seem to me to be that big of a concern that it doesn't bring in the exact amount of taxes we would like for it to, and it may be some other time. And for that reason, I'm supportive of this.
Commissioner, I guess my question is, if it brings in zero taxes for us?
Well, if it brings in zero taxes, I mean, if that is absolutely the only way we're ever going to approve an annexation, that it has to be, some kind of tax revenue to the city. And I realize what you read with the standard there, but however, this owner brings in a lot of taxes for the city. Now, is that the right way to make a decision like this? I don't know. We all have to decide that on our own. However, I think given the fact that we've got a corporate partner with the city that is asking us to do this, and it looks very much like an orderly annexation from is it an orderly process, and where it is, it's not a donut or anything. Got the little space there, yeah, I don't know what that is, but this helps clear that up. Personally, I'd hate to treat our corporate partner like that and not approving something that, just based on that amount of taxes.
Yeah.
Personal opinion.
To me, it would be almost like a loss leader in business.
Yeah.
From that, it could stem all sorts of growth and revenue opportunities, whether it be hotels for people who are coming in from traveling from out of the area, and we need temporary residents for hotels, restaurants. So to me, I think it's a nice step even by ballot to move to that location and ask for the annexation in future. And like you said, it's not, the next property owner may not want to be annexed. So I think it's an opportunity to tie it up into the city and be a good corporate sponsor as well.
And can you do you think it's not possible, or it's inappropriate to ask what status they would file this under?
I think from what the ballot heard, what Mrs. Scott
Mr. Davis?
Has said, he doesn't have that answer. And even if we had ballot heard here today, it's not an answer that is something that we can say is going to be permanent. You can have property today that is on tax roll, and tomorrow business decisions change and it becomes not-for-profit. We have properties inside the city limit that was initially on tax roll, and then some other non-for-profit organization has acquired it and put it on, and it's become non-for-profit. The city does not then go ahead and de-annex that property, so to speak. So, and from another perspective, I think when we consider looking at the plan of services that we are going to provide to this particular area, to this particular piece of property, certainly one would think that there will be city residents that will be on this site. And providing more efficient city services such as fire and police services that cover them while they are on site is good for our city, I would say. If we had a situation where there was an incident there and it took the county 5 minutes for police to respond, and we lost Johnson City citizens, instead of having a situation where it took 1 minute for the city to respond, maybe from a fire perspective or so, we would have lost significantly in terms of cost. So I think there is, from a financial perspective, there is benefit in having this in the city to provide those services for our own citizens who will be trained on that particular site or who will be working there as staff.
Additional discussion? Would anybody like to make a motion?
Can we annex the properties at 5112 Bobby Hicks Highway, 3309 City Martin Road, as B5?
Zoned.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Dagenhart. Is there a second?
I'll second.
And a second? Is there any additional discussion before we take a vote? All right, Nicole, would you please just repeat the motion for us one other time?
The motion is to annex the property located at 5112 Bobby Hicks Highway and 3309 Sid Martin Road with the zoning of B5.
Does that please, except you intend, the board intends to then make another motion, it's important to include a
Include the
plan of services.
Yes. Can we modify your motion, Chris?
Plan of services as proposed.
Okay, so, motion is to approve annexation of properties located at 5112 Bobby Hicks Highway and 3309 Sid Martin Road with the zoning of B5 along with the plan of services as presented.
Thank you. And does the second still stand for the amended motion? Thank you. All right, please call the roll.
Commissioner Dagenhart?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson?
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich?
Yes.
Commissioner Whitfield?
No.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
Commissioner Calhoun?
Yes.
And motion is approved as stated.
Okay. All right. The second item under new business then is to consider deferral on access standards in the Johnson City Regional Planning Commission subdivision regulations and schedule a public hearing for April 14th, 2020.
Actually, the commissioners, before you is, staff is tabling, this is a staff-initiated revision to the subdivision regulations. State law requires that before we amend the subdivision regulations, we have to provide minimum 30 days public notice. Today is February 11. Next planning commission is going to be on March 10, so we will not have had all the 30 days in place. So we need to push this to April and have the public hearing at the meeting in April. So that will be April 14. At the meeting in March, it will be open for the planning commission to have any discussions. It will not be a public hearing, but if you go through these and there are particular areas in the text as proposed that you want clarified or amended in a particular way, that can be done. The same way that city commission, sometimes they can amend something at the first reading of an ordinance and then proceed on to final reading. So that's the same way we are proceeding on this. The Land Use and Transportation Committee has held about 3 meetings on this. The Legislative Subcommittee has also met on this and gone through these regulations. The one thing staff wishes to submit is officially is on page 36, I think. That is figure 6 that you have in the packet as submitted. We are replacing that with the sheet that I submitted to you, in which the graded area, or the area that has to be graded, instead of being 8 feet as shown there, is supposed to be 10 feet as was recommended by the committee. And then the right-of-way total, instead of being 28 feet, it will be 40 feet. So those are the two changes that we're submitting as this. Staff recommends that we table this and schedule the public hearing for April 14.
Since we're recommending deferral, I'm assuming we don't need a public hearing.
We need a
correct?
formal vote.
We just need a vote on the
Yes,
deferral.
yes, on
And does
scheduling
somebody
that.
need to make a motion to defer then?
We need a
Or is that
motion.
a staff-initiated
defer.
motion? Okay, motion to defer.
And to table the public hearing on the 14th. I need that, please.
Motion to defer to April 14th.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second for deferral of this item until April 14th. Okay. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Commissioner Dagenhart?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson?
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich?
Yes.
Commissioner Whitfield?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
Commissioner Calhoun?
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right, well, I'm going to do the terrible thing now, guys. We should have taken a bio break probably earlier, since it looks as though it's needed. So I'm going to call a 5-minute recess, just for those who have not had an opportunity yet. Might want to have a quick break before we continue with the last items. That would be me. We're all back.
Hang on.
Oh, wait, was there somebody else that is still
Okay.
missing? Are we good or not? Yes, we're good? Okay. All right, continuing with new business. We are moving on to item number 3, which is a lot length to width 3-to-1 ratio variance request for the division of the Galloway property minor subdivision. You are on, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Before you is a request to consider granting a variance 3-to-1 lot depth to width ratio for the proposed division of the Galloway property. Here is a subdivision plat as proposed. The entire piece of property currently as it is 3.33 acre lot, and they intend to split it into 2 lots, one lot being 2.05 acres and the other being 1.28 acres. Lot 2 doesn't have any issues with a lot length to width ratio. Lot 1, the lot depth is 521.81 feet, and the lot width is 133.19 feet, which exceeds the lot length to width ratio restriction in the subdivision regulations. The applicant is requesting a variance on this on the grounds that this piece of property is in a very rural area. This is property they inherited from family inherited property, and they're trying to split it to the extent possible equally between him and the brother. As shown on this map, this is the property we're looking at. The area is generally rural, is agriculture in that particular area. You don't have a lot of density. This is the Williams Landing subdivision. Yes, Williams Landing subdivision that was constructed out there not too long ago. Some of the lots themselves are pretty long, extending into the creek. And those ones too had to have the 3:1 ratio variance granted. The purpose for this 3:1 ratio restriction is generally to encourage the construction of streets. So you don't have very tiny lots, narrow lots that may not be buildable. And then the developer starts asking for variances. So you want to have those lots, the lot width to be wide enough. And secondly, especially within the urban core, within the inner city area, we want to have these lots, the 3:1 ratio restriction kind of pushes the developer or the subdivider to build streets, and in that way create more lots and increase density inside the city. This is far away, from the urban core of the city. The area is generally rural. As shown, the lots are large in size. In the entire area, comparatively, these are very large lots. And approving this as submitted will not significantly deviate from the character of the area, and it will not significantly deviate from the intent of the 3:1 ratio. When the Williams Landing subdivision was developed, a stop street was, if we had a stop street in this particular area, that would have been an indication that this was planned for the street to be extended this way. And as such, we would have been requiring a right-of-way to be dedicated for that. And in that case, we would not have the need for a 3:1 ratio variance. But the stub was rather created at this end. So it wasn't envisioned that there would be any need for the street to be constructed within this piece of property. Based on that, staff recommends that the variance be granted.
Hassan, can you go back to the previous slide, and is there any way for you to blow up that picture? I find it, no,
As it is, no.
okay.
But I can answer any questions because I have the full print.
What is I guess I'm looking at, so there still would be road access to all 3 of these proposed lots, correct?
There are 2 lots. We're just
But
splitting
two-
one lot into 2.
Okay.
So all of them will still have their street frontage and driveway access from Crouch Road. From here, they will still have their access.
So doing this is not, I'm thinking back to, I don't know if it was last month or the previous month, that we had a gentleman come in, and he had been annexed into the city some time ago, and we basically, because of changes in that lot over time, he was left with no access from a road or something to that lot. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I think the one we had, it was a variance request for a subdivision that was denied, I think, last month. That had to do with lot size and density, not the road access. Generally, if, to create a lot, you need access to that, landlocked pieces of properties are not permitted.
Okay, I
will
thought
not
we
be
had a
able to come and approve
landlocked
of those
one
ones.
in the last, it wasn't last month, maybe the month before. Do you remember? No?
The one we had last month, I think, was that you denied, had to do with density. It was a piece of property, multi-family development that was annexed into the city, and then they wanted to subdivide it, and one of the lots would have been very small, creating a density of about 30 point something dwelling units per acre. That exceeded the allowed density in the zoning ordinance.
Okay,
It wasn't a street issue, right of way.
okay, so we're not creating any type of
No.
similar situation here?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. Are there other questions for staff?
Would this be non-conforming in any other way other than,
By granting the variance, this will become conforming. This would be legal and it will be
He's getting
conforming.
anxious. Okay,
It will not be in violation of any zoning ordinance. This is still in the county, it's not yet inside our city limit, and it meets county zoning. It's
does.
currently zone A1 in the county, agriculture.
okay.
okay. All right. Do we need to open a public hearing on this one then? I'm assuming?
Yeah. And to be very clear, you're not approving the plat, you're just granting the variance.
What is-
So, for example, they still need to go to T-Deck and prove that the lots can perk. If the lots can't perk, then the plat will not be approved. You're just granting the variance to the lot depth ratio.
All right, thank you. Okay, at this time then, we will open a public hearing. Is there anybody who wishes to speak for or against this particular? Please step forward. Thanks for waiting all this time, listening to all of this discussion that's occurred
Terry
before.
Galloway, I'm at 404 Magnolia at the present, but we'll be building a house on Lot 1. There's an existing house, a log house built in 1800 that's on Lot 2, which my brother and I are restoring. The reason why Lot 2 is larger is that there's a big gully where you can see the creek there.
Yes.
And it's unusable, so we kind of gave him the better acreage, or larger acreage.
That was nice.
So our only plan is to have our, he'll live in the log house and I'll live in my house and we'll have a garden, and that's all we're planning to do. We don't own any other property surrounding. Our family members do, but they'll be owning it for some time. We've owned all of that property since 1780. So.
Wow.
Johnny come latelys.
Any intention to develop this property further at this time?
No, we have no plans whatsoever to do that.
Are there any other questions for the applicant? Thank you again for sitting through all of this and waiting us out. All right, is there anybody else who wishes to speak for or against this one? All right, seeing nobody, I'm going to close the public hearing and open the table for discussion among commissioners or a motion.
Go ahead. Well, I'll move to grant the 3-to-1 lot depth to width ratio variance to the proposed division of the Galloway property subdivision.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Commissioner Dagenhart?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson?
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich?
Yes.
Commissioner Whitfield?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
Commissioner Calhoun?
Yes.
Motion approved as stated.
All right. Is there any other items that we need to discuss or anything under other on the agenda? In that case, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Dang it.
Adjourned.